There's a moment that happens to almost everyone the first time they arrive in New York. You're standing on a sidewalk, maybe just outside Penn Station, maybe somewhere in Midtown, and suddenly everyone is moving around you. Nobody slows down. Nobody looks at you. 1,000 people pass and not a single one makes eye contact. And your first instinct is to think, these people are cold. New Yorkers are not cold. They have a balance. There is a difference. And that difference says something very special about the kind of mind that either grows in this place or gets permanently shaped by it. Because New York is not one thing. It is everything at once, impossibly loud and strangely quiet, ancient and brand new, completely overwhelming and somehow deeply familiar after a while. The city runs on a psychological frequency that not everyone can tune into. But the people who do carry something that's hard to name but easy to recognize. The first thing you notice about someone who genuinely grew up in New York is their relationship with noise. Not that they enjoy it or ignore it, but that they have stopped being threatened by it. Psychologists call this habituation, the process by which the brain learns to filter out stimuli that are constant and unavoidable. But in New York, that process goes somewhere deeper than in most places. When you grow up in an environment that never quiets down, your nervous system has to make a fundamental choice. It either stays in a permanent low-level state of alarm, or it learns to find stillness from the inside out. Most New Yorkers, over time, develop the second. They build an internal quiet that doesn't depend on the world around them being peaceful. They learn to carry their own silence everywhere they go. This is why you'll find a New Yorker reading on a shrieking, crowded subway car with the same concentration someone else might only reach in a library. It's a kind of trained presence. The brain has learned that external noise is just information, not a threat, and it has stopped treating every signal as something requiring a response. Research in environmental psychology consistently shows that people raised in high-density, high-stimulation environments often develop stronger attentional control than average. They get genuinely better at choosing where their focus goes. In New York, that skill gets built early and tested constantly. By the time a kid from Queens or the Bronx is 10 years old, they've already been sorting relevant from irrelevant for years. That capacity doesn't go away. It becomes part of how they move through everything. But there is another dimension to this. Because New York is not just loud, it is deeply layered. There is always something underneath what you can see. A whole world moving below street level, above it, between buildings, in the spaces most people walk past without noticing. People who grow up surrounded by that kind of depth tend to develop a particular way of reading situations. They don't take surfaces at face value. They look for what's underneath without even deciding to. A New Yorker in a conversation isn't just following the words. They're tracking pace, posture, the slight shift in tone that happens when something isn't quite right. It happens quickly and mostly without conscious effort. Psychologists refer to this as social attunement, a heightened sensitivity to emotional and interpersonal cues. In a city where millions of people share tight, close, unavoidable proximity, social intelligence becomes something closer to a survival skill than a social grace. You learn fast in New York that people contain more than what they're showing. The person who seems rude when they brush past you might have just gotten the worst news of their life. The woman who doesn't smile at the counter might be the most generous person in the building. That kind of repeated exposure to human complexity teaches a specific restraint and judgment. New Yorkers are famously unsentimental, but a real understanding that behavior and character are not always the same thing. There's also something worth sitting with when it comes to directness. New Yorkers are known for it, sometimes to the point where people from other places find them blunt or even unkind. But that directness isn't aggression. It's efficiency. It's a form of respect. Actually, the assumption that the person across from you can handle the truth and doesn't need to be carefully managed around it. Psychologists who study communication across cultures have found that people from high-paced urban environments tend toward what's called low-context communication. They say what they mean. The meaning is in the words, not in the space around them. In slower, more spread-out environments, communication is often more layered. Meaning gets carried in what's not said. In New York, the pace doesn't leave room for that, and over time, people stop expecting it. This makes New Yorkers unusually honest in a way that can feel jarring until you understand it. They'll tell you what they think, and underneath that honesty, more often than not, Is genuine engagement a real interest in you as a person? The city moves too fast for pretense to survive long. People who stay end up being unusually real with each other, even when that realness arrives without much softening around the edges. Then there's resilience. New York has a history that demands it from everyone who calls it home. The city has been through economic collapse, catastrophic loss, and reinvention more than once. And the people reflect that history. There is a psychological toughness in New Yorkers that isn't about being hard, it's about not treating difficulty as an anomaly. Hard things happen. You move through them. That's simply how it works. This connects to something researchers have found consistently in people shaped by demanding environments. When your baseline already includes challenge, you stop waiting for comfort as the default state. Individuals raised in environments requiring regular adaptation develop significantly higher tolerance for uncertainty, not because they feel less than others, but because they've built an internal understanding that the discomfort is not permanent. They've already proven that to themselves too many times. There's a particular kind of patience in New Yorkers that tends to get overlooked because they're so strongly associated with impatience. And they are impatient when things move slowly for no good reason. But they can also wait. Anyone who has ever tried to build a career in New York knows that the city rewards endurance above almost everything else. Things take time. Opportunities close and reopen. You have to stay. That relationship with delayed reward shapes the way the mind processes ambition. New Yorkers often carry big goals while having made a certain piece imperfect, ongoing with the timeline not being entirely theirs to control. The ability to hold a long-term intention while functioning fully in the present moment is one of the quieter and more powerful psychological capacities a person can develop. New York, almost as a side effect, trains people in exactly that. There is something else that shapes the New York mind, and it's harder to articulate than the rest. It has to do with anonymity. In a city this large, nobody is watching you. Nobody particularly cares what you do next. That might sound isolating, and sometimes it is. But there is also a liberation in it. When no one is tracking your choices, you have to become your own authority, your own judge. The internal compass either develops or you drift endlessly. Studies on self-determination in urban environments point to something consistent. People living in large, anonymous cities where external social pressure is lower tend to develop stronger internal motivation over time. Because there is no small-town audience, no neighborhood consensus to satisfy. In New York, you decide who you are in a kind of daily private referendum that nobody else is voting in. That shapes a very particular kind of self-reliance. That self-reliance shows up in small ways that are easy to miss. The way a New Yorker figures something out before asking for help. The way they navigate an unfamiliar situation by reading the room rather than looking for instructions. The way they rarely wait to be told what to do next. Growing up in a city that never stops moving, that never pauses to check if you're keeping up, forces a certain resourcefulness into the personality early on. You learn to find your own way because there isn't always someone available to show you. There's also something that happens to people who navigate a city like New York without losing themselves in it. A particular clarity about who they actually are. In a place where reinvention is available on every block, where every neighborhood carries its own culture and expectations, you eventually have to know what's actually yours, or you dissolve into whatever the city decides to make of you. Psychologists studying identity formation in high-diversity urban environments have found that people in these cities often develop what's described as a more consolidated personal identity, a clearer, less situationally dependent sense of self. You cannot afford to be a different person in every room when you are surrounded by millions of different rooms every single day. At some point, you choose the version of yourself that's real, and you stand in it. This is why New Yorkers often seem so settled in who they are, even when they're still relatively young. They've had to hold their identity against constant pressure to become something else, and the holding has made them solid. New Yorkers adapt constantly, almost reflexively, but there is a bedrock sense of self that doesn't shift with circumstances, a core that was earned by having it tested repeatedly. It's worth saying something about the relationship New Yorkers have with failure too, because it's different from most places. In smaller cities and quieter towns, failure tends to be visible. People remember there's a social cost that lingers. In New York, failure is almost invisible. Someone can lose everything and start again 3 blocks away, and nobody will know the difference. The city is too large, too indifferent, too constantly moving to hold a permanent record of anyone's mistakes. That changes how people relate to taking risks. When the cost of failing is just the failure itself, no lasting social judgment, no permanent reputation damage, people become more willing to try things. And then try again. Researchers who study risk tolerance have found this pattern in densely populated urban centers. The psychological safety net that comes from anonymity actually encourages bolder behavior over time. New Yorkers have that safety net in abundance. What holds all of these traits together is something that might be the most distinctly New York psychological quality of all, a quiet belief that where you are matters, but who you are matters more. The city is enormous and complicated and ancient, and the people shaped by it learn early that no address, no reputation, no external achievement can substitute for knowing your own mind and being honest with yourself about it. There's a reason people from New York carry themselves the way they do, wherever they end up in the world. It's not arrogance, though from the outside, it can sometimes look that way. It's quieter. It's the bearing of someone who has been tested regularly and learned they can handle it. Someone who has made peace with noise, with difficulty, with change, and found that they're still standing. There's an old saying that New York will either eat you alive or make you. And the truth inside that saying is psychological as much as anything else. The city is genuinely difficult. It asks things of you that most places never will. But the people who stay or who grew up never knowing anything else absorb something from that difficulty. A kind of earned groundedness, a steadiness that isn't given to them. It's built, slowly, in the middle of the noise. The Hudson River flows through the city like a reminder of something. It moves in both directions depending on the tide, deep in places you wouldn't expect, shaped by forces far older than anything rising along its banks. The people who come from this place carry a little of that, something that flows in more than one direction when needed, something that runs deep where it counts, something built by pressures most people will never fully see, and somehow, still moving forward. If you know someone from New York, or if you are one, think about which of these things you recognize. Not all of them will fit. People are never just where they're from, but some of it will land. That's kind of the point. The most real things about a person rarely announce themselves. They just show up, consistently, when it matters. Drop in the comments which trait felt most true to you, or tell us something about New York that this video didn't say. Those are always the best comments. And if this kind of exploration interests you, the psychology behind where people come from, what their environment builds into them without them ever asking for it, you can subscribe to this channel. See you in a different state and with different people.